He didn't hesitate, not for a second. He saw a child drowning. He jumped in, pulled him out, and brought him back to life. And 2 weeks later, he was served with a lawsuit. Yes, sued. Not thanked. Not even acknowledged. Sued. And if you think that's the craziest part of the story, just wait until you hear what happened in that courtroom. So this happened in a neighborhood just outside of Cedar Ridge, Colorado. The kind of place where nothing really happens. You know, trimmed lawns, identical mailboxes, people wave, but don't really talk. My name's Aaron Pike, and I'd been living there about 6 years at that point. Not the most social guy, I'll admit, but I kept things in order, fixed my fence when it needed fixing, helped shovel snow for the older folks on the street. Just a quiet life. Right next door to me lived the Carsons. Mark and Elise Carson. They moved in about a year before everything went down. Now, from day one, something felt off. Not dangerous, not dramatic, just distant. Mark worked in real estate or something like that. Always on calls. Always pacing in his backyard with that Bluetooth earpiece like he was closing million-dollar deals every hour. Elise, she was harder to read. Always dressed sharp, always in a rush, barely made eye contact when we crossed paths. And then there was their son, little Noah. Kid couldn't have been more than 5, maybe 6. Quiet too, but not in the same way as his parents. More like he was used to being alone. I'd see him sometimes in the backyard, just wandering around the pool area with a toy in his hand, no one really watching him. That part always stuck with me. Now look, I'm not the type to judge how people raise their kids. Everyone's got their own way. But when you live close enough to hear things through a shared fence, you notice patterns. You notice when a kid spends more time talking to himself than to his parents. And that pool, man, that pool made me nervous from day one. No proper cover, gate latch was loose half the time, and I swear there were days that kid was out there alone for hours. I thought about saying something more than once. But you know how it is, you don't want to be that neighbor. The one who crosses a line that isn't technically theirs to cross. So I kept quiet. Until the day I couldn't. It was a Thursday afternoon, early fall, one of those weirdly warm days where summer feels like it's hanging on by a thread. I was in my garage, working on an old cabinet I'd been restoring. Had some music playing, nothing loud, just enough to fill the silence. And then I heard it. Not a scream. Not at first. It was splashing. Sharp, frantic splashing. The kind that doesn't sound like play. The kind that makes your body react before your brain catches up. I froze for maybe half a second, then pulled off my gloves and stepped out toward the side yard. The fence between our properties wasn't solid wood, it had those narrow slats, enough to see movement if you leaned in just right. And when I looked through, I saw him, Noah, face down in the water, his little arms barely breaking the surface, like he'd already run out of strength. No yelling, no crying. Just silence and water moving around him. I don't even remember deciding to move. My body just went. I vaulted that fence like it wasn't even there, landed hard on the other side, and ran straight for the pool. Shoes on, phone in my pocket, didn't matter. I jumped in. The water hit cold, knocked the breath out of me for a second, but I grabbed him, turned him over. His eyes were closed, lips pale. Hey, kid, come on. Nothing. I dragged him out, laid him flat on the concrete, and for a split second, I just stared at him. Because there's this moment, right? Where your brain whispers something you don't want to hear. You're too late. But I pushed that out. Dropped to my knees, tilted his head back, started CPR. I'm not a doctor. Hell, I barely remembered the training from years ago, but muscle memory kicked in. Press, breathe. Press, breathe. Come on, buddy. Seconds felt like minutes. Maybe it was minutes. I don't know. And then, he coughed. Water came out first. Then this weak, shaky gasp, like his body didn't even remember how to breathe anymore. I swear I've never felt relief hit me that hard before. It was like something snapped back into place in the world. You're okay. Kid, stay with me. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, called 911. Gave them the address, told them what happened, kept talking to Noah while we waited. Still no sign of his parents. Not inside. Not outside. No car pulling up. Nothing. It took about 6 minutes for the ambulance to get there, but those 6 minutes felt like a lifetime. I stayed with him the whole time, kept him conscious, kept him talking, or at least trying to. When the paramedics arrived, they took over fast. Oxygen mask, quick checks, questions fired at me I barely processed. Is he yours? No, Neighbor's kid. Found him in the pool. He wasn't breathing. They loaded him up. One of them gave me a quick nod like, you did good. Like they already knew what had almost happened here. And just as they were about to close the doors, that's when the Carsons showed up. Black SUV pulling in too fast, tires crunching the gravel like they were late for something important. Elise jumped out first, heels and all, eyes wide. Not with panic exactly, more like shock at the scene in front of her. What is going on? Mark came around the other side, looking from the ambulance to me, to the wet clothes, the water on the ground. And for a second, I thought they understood. I really did. I stepped forward, still catching my breath. He was in the pool. I heard something. I got him out. He's breathing now. Elise didn't say thank you. Didn't say anything, actually. She just pushed past me, straight to the paramedics. Is he okay? What happened to him? Why is he unconscious? One of them answered calmly. Ma'am, he was found submerged. This man pulled him out and performed CPR. Mark's eyes snapped back to me. And that's when something shifted. Not relief. Not gratitude. Something else. Something colder. He stepped closer, voice tight. You went into our backyard. I blinked, still trying to process the question. Your son was drowning. That's not what I asked, he said, sharper now. Did you or did you not enter our property without permission? There was this weird silence, like the world tilted just slightly off its axis. I saved your kid, I said, slower this time, because now I wasn't sure what conversation we were having. Elise turned toward me then, finally looking me in the eye, and I swear, there was no warmth there. No gratitude. Just calculation. You touched him? She asked. I frowned. Yeah. I had to. He wasn't breathing. She exchanged a glance with Mark. And in that moment, something in my gut dropped. Hard. Because I realized they weren't seeing me as the guy who saved their son. They were seeing me as a problem. And I didn't know it yet. But that was the beginning of everything unraveling. So yeah, that was the moment everything shifted. And I don't mean in some dramatic, movie-like way where music swells and people start yelling. No, it was quieter than that. Colder. The kind of shift you feel in your gut before your brain even catches up. Because standing there, soaking wet, heart still pounding from pulling their kid out of a pool, I realized I wasn't being looked at like a neighbor. I was being looked at like a liability. The ambulance doors shut, lights flashing, and just like that, Noah was gone down the street. Elise got in the front seat, didn't say a word to me, not even a glance. Mark lingered for half a second longer, just enough time to look me up and down like he was trying to figure something out. We'll handle this, he said. Handle this. I remember just standing there as they drove off, the sound of the siren fading, thinking, what exactly does that mean? I went back to my house, peeled off my soaked shirt, sat down on the edge of my bed, and just stared at the floor for a while. The adrenaline was still wearing off, hands still shaky. And I kept replaying it in my head. His face, the water, that moment he coughed. I mean, the kid almost died. That's what this was. And yet somehow, that didn't feel like the main takeaway anymore. That night, I didn't sleep much. Kept expecting a knock on the door, maybe a thank you, maybe an update. Something human, something normal. Nothing came. The next morning, I walked outside, half expecting to see some sign of life next door. Maybe Mark loading something into the car, maybe Elise pacing with her phone like usual. But the house was quiet. Too quiet. 3 days went by before I saw them again. It was late afternoon. I was out front trimming a hedge, and their SUV pulled in. Noah was in the back seat. I could see him through the window. Alive. Sitting up. That alone should have been enough to put everything else to rest. I stepped closer to the driveway, raised a hand. Hey, how's he doing? Mark got out, closed the door, didn't return the gesture. He's fine. Short. Flat. Like we were talking about a scratched bumper, not a kid who almost drowned. That's good, I said, nodding, trying to keep things level. I'm really glad. Elise came around the other side, opened Noah's door, helped him out. He looked smaller somehow, quieter than before. His eyes met mine for a second, and there was something there. Recognition. Maybe even gratitude. But before anything could be said, Elise gently turned him away. Inside, she told him. And just like that, the moment was gone. I stood there, still holding the hedge clippers, and said the only thing that felt natural. Look, I'm just happy I was there. That's all that matters. Mark's jaw tightened a little. Is it? That caught me off guard. What do you mean? He stepped a little closer, lowered his voice. You entered our property without permission. You made physical contact with our son. Do you understand how serious that is?" I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I thought he couldn't possibly be serious. "You can't be. He was drowning. And you don't know what you did to him." Elise cut in, her tone sharper than before. "The doctors said improper CPR can cause internal injuries." I stared at her. "Improper? He wasn't breathing." "That's not the point," she snapped. "No, that is exactly the point," I said, feeling something in my chest start to rise now. "Your kid was in the bottom of a pool, and no one was there." I didn't have time to ask permission. Mark raised a hand slightly, like he was calming a situation he didn't actually want to calm. "We're not discussing this here." "Then where?" I asked. He held my gaze for a second, then said it. "You'll hear from our attorney." And just like that, they walked inside. Door closed. Conversation over. I wish I could say I saw it coming, that I had some instinct that told me this was going to spiral into something bigger, but I didn't. I went back inside my house, sat down, and just tried to make sense of what had just happened. "You'll hear from our attorney." Who says that? Who even thinks like that after something like this? I told a couple people on the street over the next few days. Not in some dramatic way, just in passing. "Mrs. Delgado from 2 houses down." She shook her head like she already knew the answer to a question I hadn't asked. "They're not like us," she said quietly. Didn't elaborate. Didn't need to. About 10 days later, I got the envelope. Certified mail. My name on the front in bold, official lettering that instantly makes your stomach drop before you even open it. I stood there at my kitchen counter for a solid minute just looking at it. Then I opened it. And there it was. A lawsuit. They were suing me for trespassing, for unauthorized physical contact, and for potential bodily harm, resulting from what they described as untrained medical intervention. I had to read that part 3 times. Untrained medical intervention. That's what they called it. Saving their kid's life. They were asking for damages. Not some symbolic amount either, real money. Enough to hurt. Enough to make it clear this wasn't about principle. This was strategy. I remember sitting down slowly, the paper still in my hand, thinking, okay, this is happening. This is actually happening. And then something else hit me. They weren't just blaming me. They were building a case. Which meant this wasn't emotional. This was calculated. I called a lawyer the next day. A guy named Ron Beckett, recommended by a friend. Mid-50s, straight shooter, didn't waste words. I handed him the papers, watched his expression as he read through them. He didn't react much at first, just nodded slightly, flipped a page, underlined something with his pen. Then he leaned back in his chair and let out a quiet breath. "Well, I've seen a lot," he said, "but this one's special." "Special how?" I asked. He gave me a look. "They're not just accusing you of trespassing. They're trying to flip the narrative. Make it look like you caused harm while acting outside your boundaries." I saved him. "I know that. You know that. But in court, it's not about what happened. It's about what can be proven and how it's framed." That didn't sit right with me. "So what? I'm supposed to regret helping?" Ron shook his head. "No, but you are going to have to fight for the truth." I leaned back, ran a hand over my face. "This is insane." "Yeah," he said simply. "It is." There was a pause. Then he added, "But here's the thing. Cases like this, they don't usually go the way people expect." I looked at him. "What does that mean?" He tapped the papers lightly. "It means if they want to play this game, we're going to let them." I didn't know it yet, but that game was about to drag everything into the open. Not just what happened in that pool, but everything leading up to it. And once that started, there was no putting it back. So yeah, once the lawyers got involved, everything changed. What had been this strange, almost surreal misunderstanding between neighbors turned into something structured, deliberate, and honestly, kind of brutal. Because once you step into a courtroom, it's not about feelings anymore. It's about narratives. And both sides were about to tell very different ones. The weeks leading up to the hearing were heavy. That's the best way I can describe it. Not loud, not chaotic, just this constant weight sitting on your chest. I kept going through my days, fixing things around the house, grabbing groceries, nodding at people on the street, but everything felt slightly off, like I was living next to my own life instead of inside it. And the neighborhood, they knew. Of course they knew. News like that doesn't stay quiet. Some people avoided eye contact, didn't want to get involved. Others, they started talking. Quietly at first, then a little louder once they realized I wasn't hiding. Mrs. Delgado brought over a pie one afternoon. Didn't say much, just handed it to me and said, "You did what needed to be done." That meant more than she probably realized. But the Carsons? They doubled down. They stopped acknowledging me completely. No eye contact, no accidental run-ins. Just this wall of silence like I didn't exist anymore. And Noah, I didn't see him outside again. Not once. Which, I'll be honest, bothered me more than the lawsuit. Because whatever was going on between the adults, that kid had nothing to do with it. Then the court date came. Small courtroom. Nothing fancy. Wood paneling. That faint echo every time someone shifts in their seat. The kind of place where everything feels just a little more serious than it should, just because of where you are. I sat at the defense table next to Ron, hands folded, trying to stay calm. Across the room, Mark and Elise, dressed sharp, composed, like they were walking into a business meeting instead of whatever this was. They didn't look at me. Not once. The judge walked in, a woman in her early 60s, sharp eyes, no-nonsense posture. The kind of presence that makes people sit up straighter without being told. And just like that, it started. Their attorney went first. Smooth voice, controlled pacing, the kind of delivery that sounds reasonable until you actually listen to what's being said. He painted this picture where I wasn't a neighbor reacting to an emergency. I was an overstep, a risk, someone who acted impulsively, entered private property, and performed medically unsound procedures on a minor without consent. At one point, he actually said, "Intent does not excuse liability." I remember looking at Ron like, is this real? Then they brought up possible rib trauma, suggested that the CPR might have caused harm. No confirmation, just suggestion. Enough to plant doubt. And Mark, he took the stand. I watched him walk up there, swear in, sit down like he belonged in that chair. Calm, measured, like he'd rehearsed every word. Our son was recovering, he said. We were told there could be complications from the way he was handled. We had no idea what had been done to him. Ron leaned toward me slightly. Listen carefully, he whispered. He's choosing his words. And yet he was. Because everything Mark said was technically careful. He never outright accused me of hurting Noah, but he built this quiet implication that I might have. Then Elise testified. And hers was different. More emotional. More pointed. I came home and saw a stranger holding my child, she said, her voice shaking just enough to feel real. I didn't know what had happened. I didn't know if he was safe. That word again. Safe. Like I was the threat. I clenched my jaw, kept my eyes forward. Because reacting, that's what they wanted. Then it was our turn. Ron stood up, adjusted his jacket, and for the first time that day, I felt something shift. He didn't rush, didn't raise his voice. Just steady. Let's go over the timeline, he said. And that's when things started to unravel. He called the paramedic who had responded that day, a guy named Keller. Solid presence, direct answers. Was the child breathing when you arrived? No. And who performed CPR? The defendant. Successfully. Would delay have affected the outcome? Yes. Significantly. That word hung in the air. Significantly. Then came the photos. Not graphic, but clear enough. The pool. The open access. The lack of supervision. And then, the part one didn't see coming. Security footage. Not from the Carsons. From across the street. A neighbor's camera that caught part of their backyard through the fence line. Ron played it. There it was, timestamp. Noah outside. Alone. Minutes passing. No adults. Then the moment. Movement in the water. And then me. Climbing over the fence. The room went quiet. You could feel it. That shift. That moment where the story people thought they understood starts slipping. Ron let the silence sit for a second, then said, "Mr. Carson, can you explain why your son was unattended near an unsecured pool?" Mark hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. "We were inside," he said. "Doing what?" "Working." Ron nodded slowly. "So to be clear, no one was supervising a 6-year-old child near a pool." Objection came fast. Overruled just as fast. Mark didn't answer right away, and that's when the judge leaned forward. "You will answer the question." Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. Mark swallowed. "No." And that was the crack. Because once that came out, everything else started to fall apart. Ron didn't attack. Didn't need to. He just laid it out. "This case," he said, "is not about unlawful entry. It is about whether a man should be punished for preventing a tragedy in the absence of responsible supervision." He paused. "And whether we, as a society, want people to hesitate before saving a child's life." That landed. Hard. The judge sat back, looked between both sides, and for the first time, you could see something behind her expression. Not just evaluation. Frustration. Then she spoke. I have heard enough. The room stilled. She looked directly at Mark and Elise. Your son is alive because of the defendant. No emotion in her voice. Just fact. You have attempted to reframe that reality into liability. A pause. That is deeply concerning. Elise shifted in her seat. Mark didn't move. The judge continued, sharper now. This court will not entertain a narrative that punishes intervention in an emergency, especially when the circumstances indicate a lack of adequate supervision. And then it happened. The moment everyone remembers. She set her pen down, leaned forward slightly, and said, frankly, I find this lawsuit to be not only without merit, but offensive. You could feel the air change. Case dismissed. Just like that. No long speech. No drawn-out ending. Done. I didn't react right away. Didn't stand up, didn't say anything. Just sat there for a second, letting it settle. Because after weeks of tension, it felt unreal how quickly it ended. Ron gave me a small nod. That's it, he said quietly. Across the room. Mark stared straight ahead. Elise looked down. No outburst, no apology. Just silence. And that's how it ended. At least legally. But here's the thing no one really tells you. Winning doesn't always feel like winning. Yeah, I walked out of that courtroom cleared. No damages, no record, nothing hanging over me anymore. And people in the neighborhood? They started talking again. Louder this time. Friendlier. But next door? Nothing changed. The Carsons kept their distance. Still no eye contact. Still no acknowledgement. And Noah? A couple weeks later, I saw him again. Just for a second. He was by the window, looking out while I was getting my mail. Our eyes met, and this time, he gave a small wave. Just a quick one. I raised my hand back. And then he was gone. Window closed. That was it. No closure. No apology. No big reconciliation moment like you'd expect in a movie. Just life moving on. And I still think about it sometimes. Not the lawsuit. Not even the courtroom. But that moment by the pool, when there wasn't time to think, when doing the right thing was just automatic. Because if I'm being honest, if I had known what was coming after, yeah, I still would have jumped. Every single time. But it does make you wonder. How many people wouldn't? And that's the part that sticks with me. So let me ask you this. If you were in that situation, no time to think, no guarantees, knowing you might get dragged into something like this afterward, would you still do it? Or would you hesitate? Drop your answer in the comments. I really want to hear where people stand on this, because the line between doing the right thing and paying the price for it isn't always as clear as we'd like to believe.